All right, folks, we're live. We've got a twofer today. I was just here a couple hours ago. So, my guest this time around today started stand up comedy at the age of 18. And this guy is a true road warrior. He will perform for 15 people or 5,000 people. He's been all over the country, in different countries, all over the place, has been doing it for 52 weeks a year for many years. He's written screenplays. He's got 6 comedy albums, and he's got a book coming out that's called How to Fail at Stand-Up Comedy Without Even Trying. Let me pull a graphic up for that book real quick before I forget. If you're watching, there's a few of you watching. So, yeah, How to Fail at Stand-Up Comedy. There's a lot of books about how to succeed. He wrote one on how to fail. So I bet he's got some stories. Let's bring him out. It's Steve Sabo. Steve, how are you?
I'm great, man. Glad to be here. Glad to have you
Yeah,
have
I
me.
am. I'm stoked to talk to you because one of the things that this is a learning podcast, so like new comics can learn what to do and what not to do. And one of the I told you before we started, one of the questions I like to ask most of my guests are, what's 3 things you know now that you wish you would have known when you started. But I
Right.
think you've got a whole book full of things that we're going to talk about. But
Yeah.
I wanted to get into your history a little bit first off, because you started very young. If you started at 18, where did you were you located then? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Ohio. I was born in
Okay.
Cleveland. We moved around a lot as a kid, and I graduated high school in Fremont, Ohio. But
Okay.
that's a small town. Most people don't know. It's by close to by Sandusky, by Cedar Point, that area.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but I went to college at Miami, University of Miami, Florida.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's where I first started doing comedy. Is I was in college down there, and they had this Search College comedy competition. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the weirdest thing because I was always a big fan of comedy at growing up. I think a lot of stand-ups were, that's you wouldn't get into it if it wasn't something that you grew up doing or enjoying, right? So
Right.
I was always a fan, but I never thought I'd do it ever in my life. But every time I walked the class every single day, I'd pass by these flyers all over campus for this contest every single
Mm.
day. And, but it was there for weeks. And I never had the guts to sign up. I was like, I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to do this. And then on the very last week, I said, I just said, I'm going to kick myself if I don't at least call and see, if, whatever, just to find out. And
Mm.
did, and they said, sure, we'll slip you in. And by that point in time, there's only 2 weeks or 2 days, excuse me, for me to prepare an act. Kind of screwed myself in that sense. I should have just did it, but I guess
Yeah.
I may have talked myself out of it if I had more time anyway. So, well, I guess it worked out in the end. But I did it, and that's just it. The first time that's why I tell people all the time is that because people talk all the time about, oh, I should try stand up or I want to try stand up. I go, just do it. You just have to do it because the moment I did it, I realized that's what I wanted to do. I just
Yeah.
immediately, I'm like, this is it. This is my epiphany moment. This is what I want to do. Everybody, I mean, at 18, it's kind of arrogant for me to say I had an epiphany at 18, but I guess I did because
Uh,
I'm still doing it now, right?
yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's really great that somebody that young can find out at that age what they want to do because most people can't. And I even my daughter, she's grown now. She didn't quite know what she wanted to do when she got into school, and now she does. So she's doing fine. But knowing that, but of course, knowing what you know now, that was a tough way to go
Yeah.
because it's a lot easier just to get a job and uh, get a home and go to work and come home every night and watch TV. Comedy
Yeah.
is a little bit different. So let's talk about those first years after you did the comedy competition and stuff like that. When you actually started to get serious about it
Mhm.
and want to make this a career. Did you do the whole 4 years at college?
Yeah. So I was doing stand up the entire time I was in college, and I
Hmm.
did. I stayed in college, but I didn't think about doing stand up until I was getting ready to graduate, doing it as a
Hmm.
career. So I was graduating with a degree in journalism and creative writing, and I thought to myself, that wasn't a well-paying field anyway. That was not
Yeah.
exactly I wasn't shooting for the moon in that sense, but
Yeah.
I thought before I tried to pursue that, fully, I just thought to myself that I needed to give comedy a go at that point. So at that point in time, um, because I guess I started at the very beginning of I'm trying to it's been so long, my times, but I think I started right at the very beginning of my sophomore year of college.
Mm,
I think, or either the tail end of my freshman or the beginning of my sophomore. It doesn't really matter. But by that
mm,
point in time, I've been doing comedy for 3.5, 4 years, whatever, and you know, I did it a lot. Like I did it like 3 times a week. That's like my favorite thing in the world to do. I'd go everywhere I could.
mm,
So I had a lot of reps at that point in time. And I was doing pretty well, and I was being, I just felt like I had the opportunities to possibly make it as a career back then. So I
mm.
did. I decided I was going to try it before I did anything else. And that's where it gets weird, is because you have all these opportunities that are afforded to you, but you don't realize that all those opportunities aren't really that many opportunities,
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
so like when I first decided to do it, I lined up like 12 full weeks of work like immediately, and I was like, yeah,
Uh,
I got this. And then I realized I had 12 weeks of work, and that was it. That was
that's
my
it. Yeah.
career at that point. So
Uh,
I had 12 weeks of paid work, and then nothing for like the next 12 weeks. And then
uh,
I was able to book another thing and then another thing, but it was like I didn't realize it was going to be that hard, because you never do. But the first 12 were so easy. I didn't think it was going to be that hard to keep that momentum going, but it isn't that easy. It's a lot harder
right.
than people think, a lot harder.
Yeah, and one of the things, it's funny. I just talked to another gentleman earlier today. He's from Youngstown, Ohio, and he talked about the fact that as a comic, your job's so easy. You go up and you do 30, 45, 60 minutes, and that's your whole day. Well, that's not your whole day, because you got to write another 30, 45, 60 minutes, because you can't live off of that one for the rest of your life. You got to
Yeah,
book shows, you got to get paid, you got to find transportation, you got to I mean, it's all
yeah.
day. You got to do stupid morning zoo radio, and it's it's more than a full-time job.
It really is, and that's what people don't get. Like, just the process of trying to get booked is a full time job in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like, you're
Hmm.
sending out mails, you're redoing your promo pack, you're sending out videos, you're redoing videos, you're editing videos, you're updating your website, you're doing all
Hmm.
these different, contacting new bookers, figuring out what it is that they want. You're trying to network with other comedians to figure out what clubs are they in that you could get into and what their requirements are. And every place has a
Hmm.
different requirement, has a different booker. By the time you get in with one uh, club, uh, comedy is no longer there by the time your date rolls around. So then you don't even know if your date's still going to be good. But if it is good, you're talking to a whole brand new person. Then you're lining up transportation. You're trying to figure out what your lodging is going to be. Do they cover lodging? Do they not cover lodging? Are you traveling with another comedian? Who's driving? I mean, car
Yeah.
maintenance. There's a million things that you have to do. And then when you're
Yeah.
on the road, you get home and you have maybe 1 or 2 days before you got to go back out on the road. And in that 1 or 2 days, now you're rebooking shows and trying to do your laundry, trying to pay your bills, and trying to
Yeah.
maintain, any sense of normalcy in your life, which is really hard
Yeah.
to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I listen to a lot of your comedy, and I mean, I like how you're a rapid fire type guy, and um, in your bio it says that you're a chameleon. You can adjust to any room, and I've some of your video kind of shows that, because um, I mean, we all know that some rooms just don't respond to some stuff, and I you've got a couple out there where your opener did okay, your second one kind of fell flat, and then you went into something. I could tell you just shifted gears. I could see in your eyes that you were shifting gears, and you went into something else, and that's an art in and of itself, because it's I mean, you got what you want to do, but when you find out it's not going to work, you got to edit, and you've got a split second to actually do the edit. And
Yep.
I have to say, I watched a few of those, and I can tell that you're doing that quite a bit. Have you ever done the set that you expected to do when you're in a live situation
That's a
besides an album?
right. That's a very good observation, and because that's exactly what I do. So for me, I try to exactly what you're saying is I used to try to do it. I used to schedule a whole set. This is what I'm going to do
Mm,
from the beginning to the end, and that just doesn't work for me because I do often have to change gears. That's the way I do. The way I do it. So I usually start. I know how I'm going to start. I know my first one, two, or three jokes, and I
mm,
usually know how I'm going to end, or something like that. But then I try to let the audience dictate where I go from there. So just like you would see, I would do a joke, and if it does well, then I'm going to continue on jokes in that vein. If it doesn't do as
mm,
well, I'm going to switch to another area and see how that goes. And if that doesn't
mm,
go well, I'll switch to a third. So I've got like 6 or 7
yeah.
different paths I can take at any given
Mm,
moment. And from any spot in the show, I can switch gears and do that too. Sometimes I'll do mostly crowd work. If I can't figure them out right away, I'll do a lot of crowd work up front and then try to
yeah.
figure it out and try to ease them back into material. But I've done some shows that were completely, all crowd work, and I've done some shows that were just material, and I've done some shows where they seem like they want edgy stuff at first, and then something happens, they don't. So then you got to pull back.
Yeah.
Done shows
Yeah.
where you start off being cleaner and gentler because you think that that's who they are, and then you tell one dirty line and they erupt and go crazy, and you're like, oh, this is what you wanted the whole time. So then you
Yeah.
got to
Yeah.
go that direction. So it's weird because you think based on the environment, right? Like you think if you're like in like a dive bar, they want it raunchier or dirtier, and if you're like in a nice country club or something like that, then they want it cleaner. But that isn't always the case. It's you just
Yeah.
never know. You just don't know, and that's
Yeah.
what I like about comedy because you can always if you've been in it long enough and you have enough material, you feel confident no matter where your environment is because you've got the stuff to make it work.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of times you really need to please one table, and then the rest of them will come along for the ride. And you know how laughter works. If you've got one table that'll just laugh at everything you say, and you can get them going, they get everybody else going. So sometimes you're just winning over, and sometimes it's just one person. But when I do my act, I'm always like, okay, if I can get this guy to laugh, then I can get anybody to laugh.
Yeah,
But the funny thing about audiences is you always, when you're in it, you forget that, okay, these folks maybe go out 3 times a year, some of
right.
them, and they decided to go to a comedy club. They don't know you. They didn't do any research on you. They don't know who you are. They just want to laugh. And if their expectations are, you're going to be like the last comic they saw 15 years ago, and you have to adjust for that. And then you always get there's always one table of people that want to be part of the act, and
Mhm.
want to interject at every joke and all that. And it's tough. And I like how you put everything out so people can see it, and you can see some of the times where the audience just wasn't on your side, and you really had to work to get them around to your side. And a lot of comics, they're too vain. They don't do that, and they only put out the greatest hits. So it was kind of fun watching some of your more uncomfortable moments, I'll have to say.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. It's funny that you say that because I always feel like that. Like if I get a bad review on a CD or something like that, I'll post that
Mm,
as quickly as I'll post a good review. I
yeah,
try to be as honest and transparent as I possibly can because it's just not realistic. You're not going to always win over every audience at all. But I also I don't know. I think sometimes I like those moments when you're struggling as well. I think that brings out, more humanity, more reality of the thing.
yeah,
So yeah, I've always been like that. I've always just I kind of enjoy, I don't know what you would even call that, but the work actually working, for
Yeah. Yeah.
for my, yeah.
And you've got kind of a classic old school style that really you've modernized it obviously, but that classic style you don't see as much anymore. Everybody wants to have some sort of a weird angle or be, super, everybody wants to be Bill Burr or whatever. Um, and, not everybody should do that. And it looks like you've got that down to a point where you can play for just about any audience.
Yeah.
You can go blue, you can be G-rated or anything in between. And that's what a lot of comics fail to realize at the beginning, that you got to have a portfolio of just about everything if you want to have more than one date a month scheduled.
Yeah, yeah, that's really true, and it's funny that um, you're right. There's a lot of comedians that they become comedians because they like the style of one particular act. Say you said Bill
Yeah.
Burr, or let's say even like Mitch Hedberg or whoever.
Yeah.
They want to be that comedian, but
Mhm.
they don't understand that they are not that comedian. They
Yeah.
don't have anywhere near the skill set, at least, and they probably never will. Those they're always, because it's not like they're emulating somebody that nobody knows. They're always emulating somebody who's, at the top of
Yeah.
the chain, and they're never going to
Mhm.
get there. I mean, they might get there on their own if they create their own style, but by copying somebody else's style, they're never going to get there. And
Yeah.
so that's where part of the problem comes in, is until you develop who you are as a comedian, you're never going to reach the fame that you want to be at. And that's where I think a lot of comics get really frustrated, and they end up quitting after 5 or 10 years, because they think, oh, well, these people don't understand me. They don't respect me. They don't do da, 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 da. But I think that, when you really look at it, a lot of comedians, they don't understand that. Well, let me say it differently. Some comedians, I don't want to say a lot or most or, whatever, but some comedians go into comedy just to please themselves, and other
Yeah.
people go into comedy to make a living at it, to make
Mhm.
a job. And if you want to do it, if you want to just please yourself, you can go to open mics and do whatever you want, have at
Right.
it,
Yeah.
enjoy that. But if you want to be paid, if you want to, do this for a living, to entertain audiences, as as an actual paid performer, as a profession, you're going to have to
Mhm.
learn how to do it, do it right, to please the people that are paying you.
Yeah. And it has to be a mix, because if you don't like what you're doing up there, they know it. You have to like your material too, in
Right.
order to make it believable. But yeah, and it's one of the things that, I have always admired about comics that can do just about any room. And Tom Dreesen was my first guest on the podcast over a year ago, and he can do anything. He can do he can do a stag roast. He can do whatever, and people that can do that obviously get more work. And the whole goal for most comics is to be able to make a living doing what they love, which is comedy. And in order to do that, sometimes you have to change things up a little bit and make some sacrifices, and understand that you can't be the super new edgy guy on the street in your first couple of years. You have to grow into that type of stuff, and then you can really bring everything out full tilt. But yeah, I am intrigued by the book that's coming out. So
Out today.
it's out today. Cool. I knew you said pre-sale at one point, but I didn't know if it was up or not. But
Yeah.
so let's take me through how to fail at stand-up comedy without even trying. First of all, what made you want to write that book?
Well, here's what it came down to, this, right? Is that I was just, trying to think. I wrote a novel. I wrote a novel called Jester's Run,
Mhm.
initially. And then the moment I finished writing that and I put it out, then you kind of feel, you know, you almost have like this emptiness, and you want to do something else. You want to create something else, and you don't know what to
Mhm.
create. And what was funny, when I first was put out the book, a lot of people said, well, why did you write a novel? You should write a book about comedy, because that's what that's what you've known your entire life.
Right.
And I went, well, there's already books on comedy. There's a ton of books on comedy. Every book in the world about comedy is almost exactly the same. And then
Yeah.
I thought to myself, well, what book isn't out there? They have all these books on how to write, or how to perform, or how to, do this properly, but they don't
Mm.
tell you how to actually be a comedian in a real life sense, in the sense of all the mistakes that you're going to make along the way. They
Yeah.
don't tell you any of that. None of those books tell
Mm.
you, because you know the mistakes are the things that's going to make or break you. It really is, in the long run.
Yeah.
You can write the best joke in the world. You can be the greatest joke writer in the planet, and if you can't get work, nobody's going to see that.
Right.
And
Right.
it could be, the best performer in the world, but if you have a bad reputation for bad behavior or things like that, nobody's going to want to hire you. So
Mm.
if you can learn how to navigate that, and learn what bookers are looking for, and that's one of the things that you have to understand too, is I've booked rooms myself. I also, sometimes
Mm.
comedians, and the
Yeah.
things that people send you, saying that they want to work, and in the way they approach it, I think to myself, these guys, you can immediately tell. A booker can immediately tell if this person works on a regular basis or doesn't work on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And you know how they say, fake it until you make it, right? That's one of the
Yeah.
things that's important, is that even if you don't work on a regular basis, if you approach me in the right professional way, I'm probably going to give
Yeah.
you a chance, and I'll probably,
Right.
you might even fool me if I'm not, being that careful and don't do my research on it. But
Right.
immediately tell when somebody's not, like somebody,
Yeah.
as an example, somebody sends you their avails, and then an hour later goes, "Did you get my avails?" You know, uh, you
Yeah.
know, you're like, "Are you kidding me? I it's been an hour." You know, but they do that
Yeah.
stuff, or they'll get angry with you. Or I think one of my favorite stories that happened to me once, is there's a comedian, and he was from New York City, and I don't remember, he had won some sort of a contest, and as a result of
Mm.
winning that contest, um, a lot of bookers had agreed, and I was one of the bookers that agreed, that the winner of the contest can get work, at certain places. I can give him
Mm.
some work. So he contacted me about, the work that he could get, or whatever, and it's, and so I told him what the pay was, and
Mm.
and the first thing he says, he goes, "Okay, that sounds good. And you guys, do you guys include flights? Like, you're paying for the flights and stuff like that?" And I'm like, "Oh, you've never worked at comedy ever, did you? You just
Yeah.
and you have no idea what the business is like, because
Yeah.
nobody's paying. I mean, not at that stage anyway. I mean, if you're going to
No.
a big club and you're a big name act, yeah, they might
Yeah.
pay your. But I'm booking a one nighter in the middle of, Nebraska, paying for your flight. He had no idea, no idea. Like, I immediately knew, this guy, he's not really ready to work, because and you wonder too sometimes, how that guy's gonna, maybe he'll adjust, maybe he'll figure it out on the way, but he's gonna have a lot of rough
Yeah.
shows if he's gonna go out without having any idea how the world actually works, in as far as comedy is.
Yeah. And it's funny. It amazes me how little sometimes people know, even though we've got an internet and people doing this, podcast talking about, how to act and how to be and what to do to succeed. And some people still don't know. But, when you think about it, back in the day, before the internet and all that, how could anybody know? I mean, if you're from the Midwest, you think that you can go to LA and do one set at the Comedy Store and get on Johnny Carson. I mean,
Right.
people thought that, and some of them actually did okay. I mean, Letterman did it, and he did pretty good for himself. But it's funny, and Dreesen did the same thing after him and Tim Reed broke up. So it's funny how people still have that, and they think they should go from their first open mic to headlining within a couple weeks, and getting the big paycheck along with it, and it just doesn't happen that way.
It doesn't. And what's funny too is people that aren't in the comedy industry at all are probably even worse, because I have people that they'll see me after a show and they'll go, "Oh, you're really great. You know what you should do? You should get on Last Comic Standing, or
Yeah.
you should get your own Netflix." And you're like, "Oh, what a great idea. I never
Yeah.
even thought about that." Like, thank God
Who
you were
books
here.
that room? Yeah.
You know? I was like, don't
I'll
you
get
think
right
I
on
would
that.
have done that already? Easy.
So you've got you've got a great idea for a book, that people can look to for all your mistakes. Let's talk about some of the stuff that went on in your life during your comedy career that you just totally fucked it up.
So much of that. And it's so I'll give you a really simple one out of the gate, right? And that's I'm
Uh,
glad you cursed, because I wasn't sure what the level of cursing was in this, because this
yeah,
first
I always like to be the first. So yeah.
I'm glad that you are. Because the first one involves that, right? So when
Yeah.
the first thing happened is when I first started doing comedy, I was in Florida. So in order to get more work, anybody who knows, how the states work, Florida is a big state, and to get out of Florida,
Uh-huh.
7-hour drive, no matter where you're at. So it was a big
Yeah.
deal to try to get work outside of that, because I had to get a lot of work. I couldn't just go out for a week, because that's not gonna, it's not gonna make sense to drive 15 hours and come back 3 days later, financially.
Right.
So I had to figure out how to make that work. So what I did is I saved a bunch of money, went on a big road trip, and set up all these auditions across the country, and all these different
Mhm.
clubs. And all the clubs accepted me, because I was smart enough. I waited until I was ready, to get work.
Mhm.
Went to these clubs, and the one club that didn't accept me for one particular reason, and that reason was, in my audition I said fuck one time, you know,
Uh-huh.
and and it upset me, and I was mad for years. I mean, probably even over a decade before I actually realized it and figured it out. Because
Uh-huh.
what I do it all the time, so what I tell people to do, you get there, you find out what their rules are, ask them what they're, I have 7 minutes. Okay, I have 7 minutes. What are my rules? What words can I say? What words can I say?
Mhm.
Where's the light? All those type of things, right? And I
Right.
said it, I established it, and I went up there and I did a great set. And like, I had by far the best set of everybody that night. Like, it's one
Mhm.
of those moments where you just think, like, oh yeah, they're gonna be, pulling me into the back room immediately to sign me
Yeah.
for 15 weeks or whatever. It was just one of those sets. It was so great.
Uh-huh.
And then I called the next week, and they didn't even answer the phone. They didn't take the call. Uh, they didn't call me back. So I called again, and I called again, and finally, when I finally got to the person, they said they were going to pass, and I was just like, I don't even I don't even understand why. Why would you? Did you
Uh-huh.
not see my set? It was amazing.
Yeah.
And she says, "Yeah, you said fuck." And I go, "Yeah, I said fuck once, because you didn't say I couldn't say fuck." And this is what she said to me. She goes, "If you were ready to work, you would know you can't say fuck in an audition." And
Ah.
that was like, Jesus, are you kidding me? I'm gonna lose all this work just because of one word. But then it took me a while, and I
Yeah.
realized that she's right, because a lot of people are going to do an audition. They're going to do their cleanest material for an audition. They're going to be the
Mhm.
best they can. And if me saying fuck in 7 minutes is my cleanest material, at least that's in her head, then she doesn't
Yeah.
want me on her stage, because she has to imagine that my next 20, 30 minutes is all rape material, or whatever else. So
Right.
I came to the realization that you should know, and that's my first thing of advice is, regardless of what they tell you the rules are, have your own set of standards that make sense, that are reasonable,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
On that same level, here's an example. I hired a comic to open for me once at like I don't know, it was like a I don't know, like an AmVets, one of those type of places. And the
Mhm.
rule of that show was don't say fuck. So I told him,
Mhm.
only rule is don't say fuck. And he didn't say fuck. But what he did do instead was he went on stage and he dropped the C word 4 separate times.
Oh man.
They were freaking out. And
Yeah.
it, and afterwards I'm like, what were you thinking? He goes, what? I didn't say fuck. I go, the C word is worse than fuck. Like, how do you not? But I didn't say it. So you have to have, a level of common sense, or I guess even saying common sense isn't common for everybody. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the problem. He thought it was one word and that was all. But there's a lot of things
Yep.
that you have to just kind of use your brain, in a sense. If in doubt, don't do it, especially at an audition.
Yeah.
It's as simple as
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, any reasonable person should know that don't say fuck means that and all the other words that could be centered around that. It's pretty easy.
Hey, you would think, but I can tell you, it didn't happen. It didn't happen that way.
Yeah.
So, you know, but if you're gonna say other things where you mess up, it's not having a good car. If you don't have a
Uh,
good car, you're not gonna make it in this business because you're gonna miss out on gigs. All the money you're gonna make is gonna go into car repairs. You're gonna be stranded on the side of a highway. You
yeah.
don't think about how important a car is, but it's probably the most. It's probably having a good car will get you more work than having a good act.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good advice. Did you ever, I don't know if this is in the book or not, but did you ever experience where bookers either had a bias against you or had preconceived notions that
Yeah.
you just couldn't overcome?
Sure. Absolutely. 100%. I've had that several times, and like here's a good example of that is that and I talk about this in the book too. Is I did get a reputation early on as being a dirty act, and
Mhm,
because I was a dirty act, and I like dirty. I mean, I always liked dirty comics.
mhm,
And I like dirty comedy personally. I like,
mhm,
and some bookers just don't like the book dirty comics, and that's fine. I have hours and hours and hours of material that isn't dirty. Plenty of clean
mhm,
stuff. I do corporate shows, but it's hard for certain bookers to get past that and to understand that if they themselves think that you're a dirty act. So I had a lot of problems with that. An example being is that I asked another comic to vouch for me, and he says, I've worked him many times. Um, he crushes every time on stage, and then at the very end wrote something to the effect of, his thing is he's a little dirty for my taste. And I'm like, why would you say that? Why? You just destroyed it. There's no chance for me to work now just because of that one statement. And
uh-huh.
I don't have to be dirty. The show you worked with me on, was a bar gig. It was a bar gig.
Yeah.
It's They wanted me to be dirty. You have to get that. You have to understand that.
Right.
But some bookers, they just don't want to get past that, and that's an example. But some people have that prejudice. Or I also, at one point in time, and it's in the book, I talk about it. I had a reputation as maybe being a little too much of a drinker, a little too much of a partier.
Uh-huh.
Which in booker terms, that's too much of a liability, and
Yeah.
they didn't want to hire me because of that. But in the last 10 years or more, I, you know, I barely drink. If I drink on stage, it's a beer I brought up there with me, and almost as a prop, not really even to
Yeah.
drink, just to say, hey, I'm one of you guys. We're all in this together.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
I never drink before shows, ever. And I barely drink during a show if I can avoid it. But when I first started doing comedy, I was the party guy. That was my character. I was a big party guy. I'd
Mhm.
go up on stage, I'd talk about tequila, and the audience would order me a shot, and I'd do a shot with them, and they'd order me another shot, do another shot with them. And the next thing you know, that's what I
Yeah.
would do. And which works great at bar gigs, but not great at the country club, not great at the Funny Bone. They don't want that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it can definitely be a hindrance. And even uh and that's an example too. Finding the right comic to vouch for you can also be a problem, because
Uh-huh.
if you work with a comic who has a bad reputation, and he's the one that's recommending you, you're probably not going to get that gig. you know
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if he's an in, it doesn't work.
Right.
So it's got to be the right
And it's
person.
also it's also very competitive, and I'm sure you've experienced comics that may have embellished their opinion of you so that they could get the gig instead of you.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like to say it like that, but yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
comics that will that just don't like you, or you're not part of their crew or whatever it is, and
Mm,
they don't want you taking a spot of theirs or somebody else's. So they
yeah.
might say, "Oh, you're thinking about booking that guy? Oh, I don't know about that. I heard he had he had a meltdown over here. Or he had that." It's easy for comics to try to do that. You think they're trying to help you, but they aren't necessarily.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah. And it's hard. That's one hard thing for a comic because, one of the basic things about most comics is that we want to be liked
Sure.
and we want to be part of a group of people, of like-minded people, and be a brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever. And in a lot of cases it is that way. I mean, you make lifelong friends doing comedy, but you also make lifelong enemies, and you have to really develop a thick skin for those people who you're not going to win them over. They're never going to come to your side. They don't like you for some reason, and it just ain't going to happen.
And it could be any reason, which is the craziest thing, right?
Yeah.
So it could be something as simple as you worked a club that they've been wanting to get into and they never got a chance to get in that club. So they hate you because
Mm,
you had it. Or it
yeah.
could be that they were at a club and they were hitting on a waitress, and she says that she just saw your act and thought you were the funniest thing ever, and they hate you because of that, because the girl that they wanted to hook up with thought you were funny. Or it could
Yeah.
be, there's a million different reasons. It could be
Yeah.
you joke about, say, running, whatever, and they were writing a joke about running, but your joke is better than their joke about running, so they resent you because of that. There's
Yeah.
so many different possible reasons, and you can't know what it is. But the best part about it is they'll still act to your face like your best buddies. Hey,
Mm,
what's up, man? Even though they just torpedoed you in your career on the side.
yeah.
It's a weird business, man. It's not good. And if you don't have a thick skin, you're going to be paranoid and crazy all the time, because you'll have
Yeah.
situations uh where you'll get 10 weeks of work, straight up, and then you can't for 6 weeks you can't book anything. And then you start getting your head
Mm,
going, like, well, what happened? What did they hear? What do they know? Or why do they, why is I see this guy's getting work. Why am I not getting work? And what's happening?
yeah.
I'm way funnier than this person. I don't understand. It's enough to drive you crazy. You just
Uh-huh.
have to stick with it and keep your own path, and it'll work out eventually. At least, you know, I guess I could say that for me it has. I can't speak for everyone.
Yeah.
You know,
Now, one of the things that uh, I think that is evident about you is that you're kind of a workaholic, and that you will do whatever it takes to perform as much. I mean, you talk about having a good car, so you'll go wherever and
right?
perform wherever. Um, do you have anything in the book about burnout,
Oh, sure.
where you did a little bit too much of that?
Yeah. I do talk about that. One of the things there's a whole section in the book where I talk um about your physical, mental, and emotional health, and I think that's a really
Mm,
important. And because a lot of comics, they'll fall into, there's so many categories that these comics or so many things that you can do, where some comics they'll do their act, and they get so stuck on their own act, because it works, that they end up not doing as well because they no longer have the passion for those jokes. So they're
yeah.
just the motions, they're just telling the jokes, and all of a sudden they're not doing as well, or they're not drawing as well,
Mm,
for this reason or that reason. And I just talk about that. I just talk about comics that need to, if you got to take a break, you got to take a break. And if you have to quit comedy because you're not enjoying it anymore, there's no shame in that either. There's a lot of things
right.
in this business that it's a hard business. It's a hard business. It's not good for you. It's If you're doing it for money, it's probably not the best job in the world. And if you're doing it
Right.
for stability, it's not the best job in the world.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it for any variety of reasons, if you're doing it, just to be, um, if you're doing it for any other reason, then it's this is what I tell people. I don't know how to word this the best way, but I say if you're doing comedy for any other reason other than the fact that you have to do comedy,
Mm,
it's gonna be tough on you. Because, um, if you're not getting that personal satisfaction out of the job, out of that career, you're going to get burnout. You're going to get destroyed in that. So I tell people to
mm,
constantly keep it fresh, constantly write new jokes. Try at least one new joke a week that you can be excited about, something that you can keep, that gets you motivated and keeps you going. And I find that keeps you from being burnout. Now, when you're on the road all the time, um, you for me, like I can't relate to some other people in that sense because I love being on the road. I do, but I don't have a
mm,
family. I don't have a wife. I don't have kids.
mm.
So when I come home, I don't really have a lot to come home to.
Right.
And
Mm.
for the longest time, I didn't even have a nice place to live because I felt in my head that if my place was too nice, then I wouldn't want to leave it. You know,
Yeah.
that was what I did. As I not that I ever lived in like a shithole, but
Right.
as close to a shithole as can be
Yeah.
and still be a home.
Yeah.
So you have to love what you do. That's the bottom line. You have to love what you do.
Right.
If you're miserable and you're hiding that misery by getting drunk every single night, you're not going to last very long. You're just not.
Right. Yeah. When you were putting the book together and you were looking back on your career, did you look at any epiphanies on your act in particular where you you saw that, oh, I've been doing it like this for so long, I need to be more like this on stage? Did you ever have any times like that where you found out, yeah, you know what, I was doing it okay, but I wasn't doing it 100% right?
Sure. Yeah. A lot. I have, throughout my entire career, I've had those moments, and I think some of
Mm,
it comes down to maturity as well, and it's
mm,
maturity as a person and maturity as an act. But you know, like I said, again, when I started out, I was 18 years old,
mm,
and like zero life experience. Like nobody wants to hear
mm.
about how great high school was. When they're 40
Yeah.
years old, working or working a job, at a
Yeah.
factory. It just doesn't work out for them.
Yeah.
So uh I like one of the first things I always says I would have started comedy way later in life if I was smart about it. 25 to
Mm,
28, probably be perfect. You have some life
mm.
experience and maybe some money in the bank, a lot of different things going on with you. But like what
Right.
that I realized that I when I first started doing comedy, I wanted to be that edgy comic like that you talked about. I wanted to be that guy.
Mm,
So I would
yeah.
intentionally say and do things to antagonize the audience, and it led to 12 separate times of me being physically attacked on stage.
Yeah.
And when you look back on that, you go, yeah, that was probably not the right thing. I probably
Yeah.
shouldn't have told the guy who got a phone call from his mother, who was dying of cancer, that I was going to go over to her house and fuck her later that night. That was
Yeah.
probably the way to approach that. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
different ways to do that. And
Right.
as far in that, and then I remember I did a joke once in my career, and I tell the story in the book too, where me and this other comic, we went out to a diner. We are going to do some writing together. And one of the things I asked him, I had this new joke, and that wasn't even that new of a joke, but it was a joke I was working on. And I was comparing, this is, I hate even saying this like this, but the joke was about how people always wanted to show you pictures of their kids. And like they're so proud of their
Uh-huh.
kids, pictures of their kids. And if you don't have kids, to me, the equivalent of that would be if I took pictures of my shit and then showed people pictures
Yeah.
of my shit. Look at this, isn't this great? I'm so proud of this. Da, 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 da. And it worked really well on stage. But then I was going to this comic, I go, hey, do you have any advice on this joke so I can make it better? And he just like really calmly just like looked at me And he goes, yeah, I could probably help you make that better, but it's still going to be a shit joke.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Yeah.
all he said. And then I was like, fuck this guy, But then later
Yeah.
you look back at it and you go, oh, right. He's got a point. Why am I writing
Yeah.
jokes about shit? Why am I worried about jokes about shit? You know what I mean? I should try to
Yeah.
do something maybe a little bit more personal, a little bit more, relatable and more, have more of a connection to the audience on a real level than just some scatological joke about, you know, whatever, excrement.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's still funny, but like you said, it's still a shit joke. So
It,
there
I
you
mean,
go. Yeah.
you should always try to be as personal as you can. And that's one of the things like when you hear comics talking about, oh, this guy stole my joke or this guy stole my joke. I always used to joke about this and say, I go, I don't have to worry about people stealing my jokes because my jokes are terrible. So it's the way I tell them to make them funny,
Yeah.
Uh, if
Yeah.
you write jokes that are personal enough that nobody could really take them because it's your life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the keys.
Right. I totally relate to the attacking the audience thing, because I I people who know me now would not think I'm like this because I'm very zen now, but I didn't used to have a fight or flight response. It was always fight. It was always, no
Yeah.
matter what happened, if you mess with me, I am going to hit you. And I've outgrown that, but if I started comedy way later, and if I would have started when I was young, I just would have been in fights all the time. It would have been
Right.
it would have been total mayhem. So I can totally get that, because it's hard. Your ego's up there, and you've worked hard for stuff, and people are shitting on your act. There's a shit joke, but they're going after you, and you do want to respond in kind, and it's hard not to.
Yeah, it's you want to win. Like that's the kind of thing when you're on stage and somebody's talking or somebody's interrupting you or doing whatever, your
Yeah.
goal is, no, this is my time. In your head, this is my time. You're not going to win. You're not going to win. I'm going to do it, and whatever it takes, I'm gonna, but the audience isn't necessarily going to be on your side when you're
Mm.
doing. That's something you have to understand too. Is you have to find when you're dealing with hecklers, and I talk about dealing with hecklers in there too. Is finding the middle ground, is being aggressive enough to get them to shut up, but without turning the audience off against you. And that's
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's a delicate balance. It's something that's not as easy for everybody to do, and you have to figure out a
Yeah.
way to do that properly. And there,
Hmm.
there's so many elements to comedy that can be done so many different ways, which is what I think makes it great. You know,
Yeah.
uh, like Bill Burr is completely different than Gabriel Iglesias, which is who's completely different than Dave Attell or Dave Chappelle. There's so
Yeah.
many approaches, and that's what makes it great. But even having so many different ways to do it right, there's only so many ways to do it wrong, and if you do it wrong, it's going to bite you in the ass in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. Thinking about your career and all the people you've worked with, what do you think is the best piece of advice you got and the worst piece of advice you got?
Ah, the best piece of advice and the worst piece of advice. Now, the best piece of advice is pretty easy, and it's going to sound really dumb to people that don't do it, but the best
Mm.
advice I ever got was somebody told me that travel with my own pillow, right? And
Yeah.
never even made when I got that. I was like, why would you even why would that's stupid. But it's
Yeah.
such it's so meaningful. You never know when you're gonna end up
Yeah.
sleeping in a car. You never know when you're gonna be in a condo that that should have been condemned. It's something
Right.
home. It's a piece of your reality. It's a piece of your comfort that you can have with you. And in the end, that's the most important thing in the world. The most important thing,
Uh,
you know. Um, as far as the worst piece of advice goes, that's really tough. God, I don't know. I wish I had a better answer for you for that one
yeah.
because
Yeah.
sometimes
That's all right.
and you kind of like when you get bad advice, at least for me, most of the bad advice I've gotten were people that were suggestions for my jokes, because comics like to
Hmm.
tell people whatever, and they'll say something and they'll go, "Well, you should do it like this," and I'll go, "Why would I? That's the worst advice ever. That's the dumbest
Yeah.
thing, you know." Um, well, I give you an example of that, which I think is funny. Dennis Regan. I don't know if you know who Dennis is, but
Yeah.
it's Brian Regan's brother, and
Yeah.
probably one of the, honestly, in my opinion, one of the funniest joke writers in the world. But
Uh,
I was working with him in I think Myrtle Beach somewhere, and he was doing some joke on stage that wasn't really working. It was one of his newer jokes. It wasn't killing the way he wanted it to. But his joke was about that whatever state it was, West Virginia or something like that, enacted a new law that said you can only buy 7 handguns a week. That's the law. They limited your to 7 handguns. And he goes, that's gonna be a problem for me because I keep losing mine. And he goes, the library was his joke. And
uh,
and, and afterwards I went up to him, I go, hey, you know what you should do? You should add, I think I left it with Professor Plum or something like that, turning it into a clue joke. And he just looked at me like
mm,
just dead faced, and he goes, if I wanted advice on my jokes, I still probably wouldn't ask you. Something like
yeah.
that. Like, okay, you know, I tend to not offer suggestions anymore, unless somebody asks me in advance, if I have any
Yeah.
ideas for that, because not
Yeah.
everybody, I can tell you that. And in the end, he's right. I was changing the structure of the joke completely. It was a
Yeah.
completely, he's making a political statement, and I'm turning it into a stupid board game joke. But,
Yeah.
you know,
And I found that it's a lot different, like workshopping a premise with somebody than getting notes after you've already said something, after you've already done your act. You don't really, I mean, you want to know, but you don't want to know, and the notes don't really help after you've done an act. And the only person I listen to is my wife on notes on my act, and she's always spot on. Is I've got like Jim Gaffigan's wife. She can tell me what works and what doesn't work. And we were just talking the other day about a joke. I'm 6'5" and I'm from Indiana. I didn't play basketball, and I had done a joke about a coach that said he'd give his right arm to be as tall as me when he played basketball. And I just do a stupid look and like, doesn't the fact that you only have one arm make it actually worse than being a tiny little man? And I did it one time and it killed. I didn't know it killed because I wasn't recording myself, and I mentioned the basketball thing as using it for an opener, and she said, remember that one? And I'm like, oh yeah. So I had to rewrite it down and uh bring it out. I mean, that was like the first year I started doing comedy, and she said, that's a great joke. I don't know why you don't ever do it. So yeah, she's the only one I listen to. And I work clean, and I've got a joke that talks about stuff that my wife and I have in common. And one of the things that I do is, because I'm old, I talk young. So I call her my bae and my boo and stuff like that, so that younger people laugh at me, and that works. But one of the things we have in common, I would always say, we don't front. And she don't front, I don't front. And one of my friends said, what you need to say at the end of that is like, no, I'm serious, we don't fuck around. And it works. I actually did it that way, and it works, but it doesn't work for me because that violates my clean comedy thing. And so, I mean, I can do it, but I don't do it. And it was good advice. It just wasn't good for me. So it's funny how you get those notes, and sometimes they help, but mostly they don't.
yeah, there's probably a handful of comics that anybody knows personally, who can vibe with you on the same level of knowing your style, knowing what works for you. And then there's other
Yeah.
comedians that are just way out in left field. Just just
Yeah.
there's might work for them. They could tell that joke and have it work for them their way, but it just isn't going to work for you, and you have to recognize that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but
No doubt. I'm checking because I feel like I'm on the wrong channel here. I go to two channels. I think I'm on the wrong one, but that's okay. We're almost done anyway. But yeah, the the other question I like to ask people, and I think you probably address this in the book, and I want to put the book back up there so people can. Is this available at Amazon?
yeah, it's available on Kindle and on paperback as of today.
Excellent.
And if you're Kindle
I'm gonna.
Unlimited, get it for free.
Excellent. I'm gonna get it today. But yeah, so what three things do you know now about stand-up comedy that you wish you would have known when you started?
Okay, that's a really good question too. What three things do I know now that I wish I would have known back then? I would,
Yeah.
I guess the first one would you kind of mentioned this, whatever, is that you can do this your entire life. It doesn't mean you're going to be a star. It
Right.
doesn't. There is no guarantee of anything in this world, right? No guarantee.
Mm,
That's number one. Number two is that some people we talked about this too, just aren't going to like you. It doesn't matter
yeah.
what you do. You cannot please everyone all the time. It isn't going to work, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and three, honestly, I think it would have been is that um, certain jokes or certain styles or certain things might be good for your artistic integrity, whatever, but it's not going
Yeah.
to pay bills. So
Yeah.
uh, you're not going to be discovered by doing something that just pleases you, you know?
Yeah.
So
Right.
finding jokes that you like that the audience and the bookers also like is the key to everything, you know?
Yeah.
Not just about you. Like if I talk about in the book, or I talk about I was in Columbus, Ohio at one point in time, and I went to an open mic, and there was probably 15 comics up there, and all 15 comics did at least one rape joke, you know?
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's not getting you booked anywhere in the country. So I don't
No.
know
Yeah.
why you have that trend, or why do you guys think that's funny, but they think, oh, that's edgy enough that, it's going to get the audience, to get that little thing. Because some audiences do. They go to a comedy club because they go, oh, I want to hear something that isn't, good for polite society. But other audiences go there, they had a really shitty day and they just want to laugh, and they don't want to hear about a rape joke when, their daughter had been raped or their sister had been
Yeah.
raped, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Jokes can affect people on a very personal level, and
Yeah.
not always worth it.
That I mean that those subjects are just it's very specialty. Some people can do them, like people who have been through it. You can certainly do that, but you have to be a very established comedian to even do it. Then
Yeah,
it's you. I mean, you've got to have a lot of respect out there in order to get away with that. I mean,
yeah,
heck, some people do whole shows around it, but that is their experience, and they've worked hard to get to that point. And it's
I would.
funny, there's a Facebook group I'm on, and somebody said, when is it okay for, I think, white people to do racial humor? And my answer was, I've never done a racial joke, and I never will, because I know how to stay in my lane. And that got a couple people mad at me, but that was okay.
Right.
uh, but it's just, it's not my experience. I've got all the white privilege. There's nothing I can lend to anything racial, except for the fact that I know that I've had racists in my family,
Sure.
my great grandpa. So,
Right.
that's all I got. So I can talk about that, but I can't really make that to where it is meaningful to anybody. So yeah, I actually wrote a joke about that, and I bounced off some people, and they said, yeah, that's not going to work. So it it went back in the drawer. So yeah, but
Yeah,
yeah, I tell you, Steve, it was great talking to you. I'm glad you wrote this book. I can't wait to read it because it's funny. Steve Martin in his book Born Standing Up, he did talk about a lot of the mistakes he made, but a lot of the other ones are like, yeah, I did this, this, and this, and this is all you got to do, and then you'll be a successful comic. And it'll be good to read all the bad stuff that can happen too, and
yeah,
how to overcome it. Because obviously, you've been working long enough that you have overcome it, and when something else comes up, you've got the tools to do it again.
sure, for sure, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on here, and uh I hope the book can help some people. That's really the goal. I hope that some people can look at this and go, oh, I never thought of it this way. I never saw this angle, and or this is how you approach a book, or this is how you survive on the road, and those kind of things. And I just want to make,
Yeah.
if I can make the comedy world just a small part better, then I think I've done my job.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And I really look forward to reading it. And then maybe after I'm done reading it, I'll have you back on and we can do a little critique of it.
Hey, sounds great. Make notes.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks a lot, Steve. Thanks for being on